Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to be with you virtually on this wintry day in which we can't get out of our driveways to get to church. So I miss being with you all, but I'm also kind of glad to be with you this way. And I hope that we all feel connected with each other from our separate homes and where we're tuning in. I hope that you're safe. I hope that you're warm. And before we begin this somewhat different kind of service, I'm going to invite us all to get grounded. And so I invite you to take a few deep breaths. Deep inhale and a long exhale. Do that a few more times. Just feel grounded. Maybe you can feel your feet on the floor, or maybe your seat in the bed or on the couch, wherever you are this morning. Just sink into presence. And I'm going to invite you to say what we say every morning. And if it feels weird for you to say it out loud, you can just say it in your mind. But it's also cool if you want to say it out loud. And I just invite you to participate with me however it feels good to you as I say, come as you are, aching, tired, joyful, or seeking. Here we are woven together in love. Set down what you carry, let this be a place of rest. Here we are held in hope and mercy. Be present to yourself, to each other, and to the divine life that flows through all things. Here, together, we find the common thread of divine life that connects us all. This common thread of divine life in which we live and move and have our being, our God, who is lover beloved and love overflowing. Amen. They lived facing a wall, mistaking shadows for what is real. When one was turned toward the light, it hurt to see. The truth felt unbearable at first, but slowly, sight returned. What once seemed real was revealed as partial. What was hidden came into view, and having seen, they could not go back to living by shadows alone. So good morning again. Welcome to Common Threads Online. Slightly unconventional service this morning. Feels a little like we're back in pandemic days, but wherever we are, if you are here, wherever you are, you belong. That is the tenet of our community, and we're so glad that you're with us this morning. And if you're new and you're curious about us, well, we invite you to find out a little bit more. You see on this screen here, there is a URL where you can go and request a newcomer email. And it's a zero pressure email, just gives you a little information about who we are. And it gives you also an invitation to connect with a live person if you want to. And really talking to somebody who's part of this community is how you get to know what we're about, because that's what we are. We are a community. And so we invite you to do that, to learn a little bit more about us. We're just so glad you're here. Welcome. And if you are having a hard time, to a certain extent this morning, we're all having a bit of a hard time because we can't get out of our houses. But life has its seasons, and some of our seasons are especially hard. And so this morning, we will not have a listener down the hall because we're not in the hall. We're not there. So you're not going to be able to do that. But again, you see another URL here. you can go there to request some support. If you're having a rough time, Morgan leads our community care effort. If you reach out to her, she'll get you pointed in the right direction to get you whatever support you need if you're having a hard time. So if you are, we're really glad that you're joining us this morning, and we're holding you in all of our hearts. And so with that, how about we all just say this together this morning, or think it, or what have you. We don't need to do a call and response. That would feel weird. So let's just say this, what we affirm every week, that is, as I just said, the core tenet of our community here at Common Thread. If you are here, you belong. We are, every one of us, carriers of the inner light. We are, every one of us, carriers of divine breath. And again, if we were in the room, I would invite you to greet each other, but we are not in the room. So let's just all take a moment to be present and think about each other and hold each other in our hearts. All right. So our next slide, connecting the community. One of the hallmarks of Common Thread is we have so many things going on here all the time. So this is just a quick list of some of the things that are coming up. We certainly hope that ICE will be off all the roads in time for all the things that are happening on the 1st next Sunday. But you can see that there's just always plenty going on here at Common Thread. And in particular, we wanted to let you know about our community listening session, which is preceded by a Mardi Gras brunch. It's always a fun day, so come bring some baked goods. Let's just have some good time together that day. We have fun, we have music, we have beads, all of the things, and we're going to have this listening session. We did it last year, and we're going to do it again this year, and we're going to reflect a little bit on some of the things we talked about last February and see how far we've come, how well we have kind of lived into some of our hopes and dreams. And then we're going to think about this upcoming year. What are our hopes and dreams? This community is a community where we come together and we collaborate and we all bring our gifts and we see what unfolds. So this is a really important day in the life of our community, and we're really excited. Chris Knox, who is one of our remote community folks, came to co-lead last year. And he's coming up again this year, and he and Ashley are teaming together to coordinate this. So sure hope that you'll be there that Sunday so that we can hear from you what your hopes and dreams are for Common Thread. And as always, if you want to know what's going on, anything that you missed from the list before, from the slide, the Connecting the Community slide, or you just want to know what's going on, you can always find out all the things that are happening one of three ways. You can check out the Church Center app, you can visit our website, or you can subscribe to the weekly email. All right, so we're going to enter into just a little contemplative practice here this morning. And so before we do it, I want to invite you to get grounded. Take a deep breath. Take another one. Deep inhale. A slow exhale. Feel your feet on the floor. And let's begin. Friends, I suspected that no matter the outcome of this election, there would be a very tense few months, at least, on the other side of it. And so I wrote this before the election and haven't changed a word. As you listen to this, you know the outcome. And you know that we are far from done with the divisiveness and brokenness of our politics and our nation. The weight of this post-election time may be resting heavily in your body, mind, and heart. You might be grieving the outcome. You might be fearful of what's next in our government, or on our streets, or in our neighborhoods, and in our families. So Let yourself feel what's here, whether it's tension, racing thoughts, abject fear, waves of any kind of emotion. I invite you to allow all of it to simply be. Maybe take a few moments right now and find a space of calm in your body, in your atmosphere. Take a deep breath and exhale fully. Continue with your intentional breathing. See if you can slow your breathing down, which will in turn help to regulate your nervous system and your body, your heartbeat. Quiet your mind. Breathe deeply. Exhale fully. And be present in this moment. This being the only moment you have. See if you can relax tension throughout your body. Your face muscles, see if you can soften and relax them. Any tightness in your jaw, your neck, your shoulders. Allow this relaxation, this relaxing of your muscles and your tension to flow right through your arms and your hands and your fingers, through your torso and your hips, your legs, down into your feet. I invite you to bring a particular awareness to your feet. Feel them grounding you and connecting you to the earth and to all that is. Continue breathing. Access a space of peace and calm. And say to yourself, welcome. 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 Yes, there's no need to change anything right now. Just be still. Act not. Just notice what's happening for you and in you. As we enter a practice wherein we will wait with patience. And as you breathe, welcome each part of your experience right now with gentleness. This is a time when fear or anger or sorrow may be closer to the surface than usual. Recognize them without judgment. Notice them. Sense them in your body. See if you can access where you are feeling whatever your emotions are. And bring attention to that part of your body. Hold it in love. Say inwardly, I welcome you, fear. I welcome you, sorrow. I welcome you, anger. Welcome. Welcome. Is this all you can do today? Maybe so. And if so, then know, you are already loosening your fear's grip on you, your sorrow's grip on you, your anger's grip on you. You are courageously being with what is, and you are already just a little bit stronger. Keep breathing. Inhale deeply and exhale fully. Welcome. And if you are ready, if you are able, you are invited now to release what no longer serves you. Your egoic compulsions to grasp for control, for security, and for esteem. And to find groundedness in divine power, divine safety, and divine love. If it's possible, see if you can release your compulsive grasping for control, which can so easily arise when you feel the world's direction is beyond your understanding. And in letting go of control, see if you can open to divine power. The power that grounds us, holds us, and connects us to something larger than any nation, leader, or election. With each breath, say silently, I let go of control in the hope of resting in divine power. Now see if you can release your need for security, especially in a moment when the future seems unsettled and you might be feeling very vulnerable. Invite yourself into divine safety, the safety found in our connection to one another and in the grounding divine love that never leaves us. If you can, say inwardly, I release my grasping for security in the hope of resting in divine safety. And now see if you can release your need for esteem, which can rise up as we brace ourselves against fear. Instead, we lean into divine love, the love that reminds us of our worth just as we are in this very moment. If you can, say silently, I let go of my egoic desire for esteem in the hope of resting in divine love. And if you can, see if you can let go of any desires you might have to change the situation. Not that you could, but those desires might be strong. See if you can begin to simply be present, the reality of what is. And as you sit with these words, allow the fears and anxieties stirred by this election by our nation's divisions, by all the tension and conflict and hatred in our world, to begin loosening their grip. You may not feel relief immediately, and that's okay. Simply trust that each breath, each release is enough. Because in this openness, we make room for courage, calm, and clarity. Finally, as we end this meditation, I invite you to place a hand on your heart. Feel its steady rhythm. This beat is your anchor, your connection to the divine and to humanity and the universe, a reminder you are held and sustained. Together, we can be present with what's happening, trusting that this work within ourselves is the beginning of a new way forward. Hold on to this space. Carry it with you and let it be a refuge. Remember, you're not alone. We're in this together, meeting whatever comes with openness, strength, and a deep knowing that light arises out of all darkness and leads us in love. The Gospel according to John. Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise them up at the last day. For my flesh is real food, and my blood is real drink. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me, and I in them." So, over the past few weeks, we've been moving slowly and deliberately through the sacraments. Not as church requirements or boxes to check, and not even strictly as Christian rituals, but as ancient human practices that form us over time. See, long before they were doctrines to defend or beliefs to argue about, the sacraments were simply ways people learned how to belong, how to repair, how to stay human together. We began with baptism as a way of naming the truth of our belonging and belovedness. Last week we turned to confession or reconciliation as what we reach for when something in us or between us has gone off course, so that we can come back to that original truth of belonging and belovedness. Taken together, these first two sacraments tell a clear and steady story. You belong before anything happens, you can return when something has been broken, and you are beloved. But that still leaves a question that feels especially important right now. What trains us to keep seeing and living from a place of belonging and belovedness over time? I mean, what actually forms us, not just in moments of insight or inspiration, but in how we respond, how we stay grounded, how we remain human when things get intense? And I'm asking because right now, things are pretty intense. I mean, there's a sense many of us are carrying, sometimes as anxiety, maybe it's vigilance, might be exhaustion, this sense that the ground beneath us is no longer as stable as we thought it was. The structures we assumed would hold socially, politically, globally, well, they don't seem to be behaving the way we were promised they would. You see this everywhere. Actions that once would have been widely recognized as unthinkable are now debated as strategy. I mean, federal officers detaining people without warrants or due process are described by some as restoring order. Greenland, of all places, becomes a flashpoint, NATO nations this past week were openly preparing to defend one of their own from the United States, and this is treated as a reasonable contingency. That kind of instability doesn't stay abstract. Our nervous systems feel it long before our minds can make sense of it. We become more reactive, more certain, more convinced that safety lies in control. And then, if we're paying attention, something deeper begins to surface. Something more than disagreement, more than surety, more than polarization. It can start to feel as though, collectively, we're no longer living in a shared reality. What makes this moment so destabilizing isn't just disagreement about values or solutions, but the sense that we're responding to entirely different versions of the world. What feels dangerous, what feels justified, what feels necessary. The same events land in radically different ways, not just debated, but experienced as though they belong to different worlds. When shared perception breaks down, facts stop landing. Arguments fail. Even appeals to empathy sound naive or even dangerous, not because people have lost their moral compass, but because they are inhabiting different realities. And in moments like this, the first thing that breaks isn't morality, it's perception itself. How the world shows up to us in the first place. Which means the most urgent question before us isn't simply what we believe or even what we value. It's this. What is shaping how we see? What practices are quietly training our perception long before we ever reach for an opinion or make a moral decision? Because if perception is what's breaking, then information alone can't repair it. You can't argue your way back into shared reality. Something has to work deeper than that, at the level where perception itself is formed. And that's where, perhaps surprisingly, the sacrament of the Eucharist enters the conversation. Not as comfort, not as escape, but as a practice that has always been about learning how to see. Now, that might feel like a strange turn to you. You might be reasonably thinking, how does bread and wine possibly speak to a fractured world or distorted perception? Well, we're going to go on a bit of a journey here through antiquity, so see if you can hang with me and follow the thread. I'll do my best to keep us steady. And let's start with the gospel we just read. In John 6, Jesus says some frankly wild, if not crazy-sounding things. He talks about eating his flesh and drinking his blood. And a good number of the people listening say, understandably, this teaching is hard. Actually, it's more than hard, because the Greek word here is skleros, which means rigid, unyielding, difficult to take in. Not confusing, not unclear, but a stumbling block. If we heard such words, we might have the same reaction. But, as usual, when we look a little more closely and put this story in context, the thing that is hard isn't what we think it is. As we know, Jesus is a first-century Jewish teacher speaking Aramaic, addressing fellow Jews living largely within what Jean Gebser would call a mythic structure of consciousness. In that way of seeing, meaning is carried through story, symbol, ritual, and shared practice. Truth isn't primarily abstract or conceptual, the way our world tends to see it. It's lived, enacted, and held communally. You don't stand outside truth and analyze it in this structure. You live inside it. And these people Jesus are talking to are very good at that. They know how to find meaning in shared practices. They know how to inhabit embodied faith. They know how to belong. Now, our ears tend to assume what's hard to hear in this story is the idea of cannibalism. But that's not really the heart of it. What Jesus is really saying here is, what y'all are doing is not enough. And for our ears to hear that, we need to unpack what he's saying in this story in the language he spoke. When Jesus speaks of flesh in Aramaic, the word he would have used is basar. And basar is a rich, layered word. It names the whole of human life as embodied. Skin and muscle, yes, but also breath and hunger, fatigue and vulnerability, strength and dependence, mortality and belonging. Basar isn't just what a body is made of, it's what a human life is like. Lived in a body, open to the world, vulnerable, never self-sufficient, always receiving. It's the very place where life is actually lived, felt, perceived. And when Jesus speaks of blood, as you might recall from our Thanksgiving lesson, he's not talking about hemoglobin and red blood cells. He's speaking of life itself, divine life, the life force flowing through all things. In fact, in Israel's tradition, blood belongs to God. It's sacred. It isn't kosher to consume. When animals are slaughtered for food, the blood is carefully removed, poured out, and returned to the earth, precisely because divine life is not ours to possess. So, when Jesus brings what we might see as human flesh and divine blood together in this way, when he speaks of eating flesh and drinking blood, he isn't being provocative for shock value, and he isn't asking people to imagine something grotesque. What he's really saying might be something more like, unless the life of God is taken into the life of your person, unless what is holy moves through what is human, there will be no real life stirring in you. And this presses directly on a separation his religious world had carefully maintained, the distance between vulnerable human life and divine life. Hebrew rituals were meant to honor that boundary, and over time, that boundary became very good at keeping divine life contained over here, while ordinary human life stayed over there, carefully managed and unchanged. So when Jesus says, unless you eat, unless you drink, you will not have life within you, he isn't threatening people. He's not establishing a new ritual with bread and wine either. Notice, he doesn't even mention bread and wine here. What he's doing is naming a truth about transformation with force and without apology. He's saying that unless this way of life actually moves through you, unless it becomes the energy animating how you respond, relate, and perceive, you might remain religious and still not be able to see the kingdom of unity connecting us with God in all things, the kingdom that is already here. He's telling them, in essence, that they cannot see it because of how they are living their faith. And for people for whom living faith is the biggest thing in their lives, that is what makes his words so hard to hear. And this is where things get interesting. Because the version of this story that has been handed down to us comes through the Gospel of John, written decades later in Greek for a very different audience. John isn't giving us a historical transcript of Jesus' Aramaic speech. He's doing something more demanding, translating the force of Jesus' teaching so it can still be heard. And he has to, because John is writing for people who do not live primarily inside an Aramaic Jewish world, or fully inside the mythic structure of consciousness. John is writing in a world where another way of seeing is already well established, what Gebser calls the mental rational, the one in which our culture mostly finds itself. The Greek-speaking world had been moving in this direction for centuries, where meaning is increasingly carried by concepts and arguments, not just by shared ritual and story. Teachings are heard as ideas. Truth becomes something you can agree with, debate, or admire. Philosophy is honored without necessarily letting it reorganize your life. This creates a little bit of a problem for John as an evangelist to the Gentiles, because the kind of thing Jesus is doing, collapsing the distance between teaching and life, can easily get translated in the minds of people familiar with the likes of Plato and Aristotle into something safer, a philosophy, a moral understanding, a set of inspiring principles, but not the kind of transformation that can actually clear their lenses of perception. So, John refuses to let that happen with his translation. In fact, he even doubles down. The word in this passage that we translate as eat doesn't mean polite consumption in Greek. It actually means chew, gnaw, even munch. It's deliberately physical. His language insists this must be taken in. This must move through you. This must change how you live. And although this language would have sounded unequivocally strong to the people he was writing to, it actually wouldn't have sounded strange. Because you see, ancient mystery rituals that involved the consumption of a god through wine in order to be transformed and see ultimate reality as it is, energized, unified, humming with life force, were a very familiar practice in the ancient world. And this is where a book I devoured in 2 days a few years ago becomes genuinely helpful to us. In his book, The Immortality Key, Brian Muraresku is not a mystic chasing vibes. He's an attorney and scholar asking a fascinating historical question. Did the ancient mystery traditions suddenly disappear, or did they flow in altered form into early Christianity? See, in the ancient Mediterranean world, wine was rarely just wine. It was called pharmakon, the Greek word from which we get the English word pharmacy. And wine in this sense was a mixture of plants that often included psychoactive elements designed to alter perception. People expected spiritual life to involve altered states of consciousness. Visions, trances, ecstatic insight, these weren't fringe experiences. They were part of how people understood transformation. Not to learn new information, but to undergo a shift in how they see. The Eleusinian mysteries are one well-known example. Once in a lifetime, initiates drank a sacred psychoactive mixture called kykeon as part of a ritual meant to open them to the continuity of life beyond death and the connectedness of all that is. The ritual altered their consciousness. It allowed them to see beyond what ordinary waking consciousness could perceive. No doctrine was taught by the all-female priesthood that prepared and consecrated the wine. No interpretation was given afterward. What mattered was the experience itself. And the experience was universally transformative. The rites of Dionysus followed a similar logic. Wine here was understood as the blood of the god Bacchus, not as a symbol, but as actually taking part in divine life. Through shared drinking, movement, and song, people experienced a shift in perception, a sense that divine life was now animating them from within. Identity loosened, boundaries softened. In these rituals, to ingest the god was to become God. Not as an idea to affirm, but as a reality to inhabit. And this matters because although Jesus never calls himself God, by the time John is writing, Son of God language about Jesus is already circulating in the Greek-speaking world. Language that resonated with existing ways people understood divine participation. Not as a claim to analyze, but as an invitation to enter, to take the life of the divine into oneself and to be changed by it. Which means neither the idea of Jesus being God nor the Eucharist literally being Jesus began as formal doctrine. They were mystery before they were theology, practices meant to be lived into, not problems to be solved. So, what Muraresku suggests in this book is that the soil from which Christianity emerged in the Greek world already understood how shared embodied practices could reform perception. The earliest Gentile Christians didn't approach the Eucharist primarily as a symbol or a belief to affirm. They encountered it as a practice, one that resonated immediately with how transformation was already understood to work. Christianity didn't erase that worldview, it reoriented it. And from that place, Jesus' words can be heard both literally and metaphysically. The invitation is not believe something about me, it is enter this. Take this way of life into yourself. Let it reshape how you live, how you belong, how you see. So, you might be thinking, well, that's all very interesting. Or you might be thinking, damn, Campbell, that was a lot. But what does all of it mean for us here and now in the year of our Lord 2026? Well, if the Eucharist feels confusing or oddly inert today, it may not be because it asks too much of our belief, but because we've forgotten how seriously humans once took the power of shared embodied practices to change how reality itself is perceived. Because this was never a belief statement to agree with, it was a practice meant to change how the world was experienced. And once you see that, communion stops being about explaining God and starts simply being about learning how to see. And learning how to see changes everything. Now, of course, this raises an obvious question. Modern communion doesn't look anything like the ancient mystery rites we just talked about. Unfortunately, perhaps, there's no psychedelic wine, no sense of ingesting a Greek god. What could this possibly mean for us? Well, the truth is, transformation can certainly be profound in a deeply intense experience, but its continued unfolding depends not on something like a psychedelic trip. It is rooted in practice. Perception is shaped the same way language is learned, or trust is built, or fear is unwound, through formation, meaning repetition, rhythm, intention, and shared enactment over time. Bodies learn what ideas cannot teach. Nervous systems settle into patterns long before minds form conclusions. The Eucharist works when we let it as a formative technology of perception, by quietly retraining how we see. It slows us down, it interrupts urgency, it equalizes us, it places shared life back at the center. Week after week, the same gestures, taking, blessing, breaking, sharing. Not to overwhelm us, but to repattern us in our bodies, to remind us again and again that we belong to one another, we are one with God, and that separation is not the deepest truth about reality. Now, we're not interested here in recreating ancient intensity for its own sake. If you want that kind of experience, we know some folks who can help you find it. But a common thread, beginning during Lent this year, we'll be exploring careful, grounded ways of recovering the formative power of the Eucharist, not as spectacle or belief test, but as a practice that works on us slowly, shaping perception and belonging over time, gently. If you want to participate, there is no coercion in the spiritual life, but you are still invited to see by participating. Because in a world where shared perception is breaking down, practices that reform how we see are not optional extras, they are essential. And yes, we may be a small band of seekers here, but when perception changes, scale stops mattering. When you see reality for what it is, you see that nothing is truly separate. Not lives, not nations, not futures, which means even the smallest act of sacramental intention can ripple outward in ways we cannot measure. And of course, communion is not our only hope for finding our collective way back to shared reality together. But if we stop trying to make sense of it and see what it might work in us, who knows what it might teach us to see. Amen. Well, folks on the live stream, that's everyone today. And it's not even a live stream. It's a pre-recorded message that I hope a lot of us were able to access during the actual time of the service, because there's something about doing things together, even if we're not in the same room. And I'm not going to go through all the things that I usually go through when I'm speaking to live stream folks this week, because this is a different kind of Sunday. I'm just hoping everybody is safe and warm, and if we have power and it's possible, we're going to invite us all to do online What Are You Thinking, Sensing, and Feeling today. Since this isn't a live stream, there's no link to point you to underneath this video, but here's the URL that you can go to. Actually, you know what? We may have the link in the comments. Check the comments and see if there is a link there for you to go. But in any case, if you have been watching live and you want to get on a call and talk with some folks, that's a really cool thing to do when we're stuck in the house. And we're all well practiced in that from a few years ago. So be lovely to see you there if you can make it. But regardless, I'm just going to invite us all to put a hand on our hearts and remember that the divine indwells us, that divine life that is in us, that we must have that life move within us, and that life that moves within us wants to move from within us to those around us. And so let's extend our other hand to our city and to our world and take seriously this week our charge to be healers and repairers of that world. And I hope that everyone is, again, safe, warm. Miss you all. Love you. God bless you. Thanks for joining this morning. And I hope to see you all soon.